If you joined us last week, you'll remember that Jesus had just finished reading a text from Isaiah, which describes someone who would be anointed to proclaim good news to the poor, release to the imprisoned, and more. And the scene ends with Jesus essentially self-identifying as the person whom the prophet had described. Today we find his audience is very happy to hear this news. What Jesus was referencing was the year of Jubilee, in which, among other things, land was returned to the original owner. And what could be better news to people whose land had been taken away from them by the Roman Empire? They were more than ready for God to return their land to them. But what they weren't ready for was what Jesus said next. He reminded them of two incidents which they would rather have forgotten. First, he reminded them about a drought and famine that had occurred during the time of the prophet Elijah. And God sent Elijah to a non-Jewish widow where he performed a miracle of a never-ending supply of flour and oil, enabling Elijah, the widow, and her son to survive the famine without going hungry. And to make sure his audience had gotten the point, Jesus told them God could have sent Elijah to any number of Jewish widows who were also suffering from the famine, but that didn't happen. Next, he told the story in which the prophet Elisha was sent to cure a Syrian who was suffering from leprosy. And once again, as if to drive his point home, Jesus said there were plenty of Jewish lepers that needed healing, but God didn't send Elisha to any of them. Again, God's grace seemed to extend beyond the boundaries that the people had constructed for God. And when it became clear that Jesus was telling his audience that God's mercy and grace is for everyone, even the people they felt undeserving of grace, they decided they no longer liked what he had to say to them. In fact, they were so enraged by his words that they tried to murder him. Author Anne Lamott once said, "My Jesuit pal Tom Weston said, you can tell you've created God in your own image when God hates all the same people you do." The people of Nazareth seem to have committed the same error that so many of us are prone to, and that is making God in our own image. In preparation for today's sermon, I imagined what it would be like to return to my hometown the way Jesus did. So I got on the computer to check out the Southern Baptist Church in southwestern Louisiana, which had been home for me in my formative years. When I looked at its website, I wasn't really surprised to see its official stance on homosexuality, on gender identity, and on abortion. It's Southern Baptist, after all. Not only did it not surprise me, but it gave me a certain degree of satisfaction. You know, the kind of satisfaction that goes along with smug, self-righteous indignation. The kind of satisfaction that justifies one's resentments. But as I looked closer, I realized the church was at a different location than I remembered. And as I continued to investigate, I found pictures of the church I had grown up in, but the building looked abandoned. The steeple was missing, and the parking lot was overgrown. And I realized the hurricanes that had recently battered the area had probably taken its toll on the original site. And then I began to notice that my sense of self-righteousness had begun to leave a sour taste in my mouth. And when I took a look at their Facebook page, I didn't see protesters at abortion clinics or things of that sort. But instead, I saw photos of a church that provided pizzas and popcorn and other treats for teachers at local schools during the worst days of COVID. I saw photos of a church providing furniture and food giveaways to community members who had been devastated by not one but 2 hurricanes within the past couple years. And it seems that just when I was ready to throw them off a cliff because of their beliefs, I realized God was working through them. And that's when they passed right through my feelings of resentment. I've seen within the LGBTQ community a readiness, if not to throw evangelical members of the Christian right off a cliff, to at least keep them at an arm's length. One such example is the community's view of the Salvation Army, which, depending on what article you read, does not exactly exhibit a welcoming and affirming position towards LGBTQ people. And yet, they were the only organization in our town that was providing free meals on Christmas Day that I know of. It becomes problematic when we demonize folks or organizations who are doing good work that no one else is doing. The point I'm trying to make is that God is too big for the boxes that we may try to build for God. Like the people of Nazareth, I think that we sometimes try to own Jesus for ourselves. And in so doing, we attempt to domesticate him. We domesticate Jesus and edit his message to fit our own national, corporate, or religious agendas. We tame the gospel in an effort to make it palatable. But as the people of Nazareth discovered, Jesus will not be tamed, and his grace extends to everyone. And that includes people who don't vote the same way we do, people who don't share our values, and people who may even openly oppose us. I think if dialogue is a possibility, then we need to make efforts to be in dialogue with people who hold different views than our own. Not to try to alter their viewpoint, but in order to recognize their humanity. We do that when we share our story and open ourselves to theirs. It's time to put down the sword, folks. It's time to stop being so afraid of people who believe differently than we do. I'll close now with a prayer that I came across, which puts into words some of the things I've been trying to say this morning, such as my need for a God who refuses to hate the same people I hate, a God who is wild and will not be tamed, a God who breaks out of every box I try to build for her. It seems to us that things would be much easier if you would just do what we ask, Jesus. If you were more compliant and cooperative, more flexible and adaptable, more open to follow agendas other than your own. But frustratingly, you refuse to be tamed, Jesus. You won't be domesticated into leaving our brokenness untouched, undisturbed, unruffled. No, you prod and provoke, unafraid of the pain it might cause us, of the comfort we may have to relinquish. You are a wild God, Jesus, and we are afraid of such a God, but we choose to praise you anyway. Because a domesticated deity, a tame grace, is not what we need. You are a wild God, and we praise you that you are, because any other God would be unworthy of the name. Amen.